Everyone. I'd like to welcome those on the call to our 5th Leong Center Trainee Hub webinar, which just amazes me. Today's event is titled Engaging the Community in Research, Insights from Youth Partners. I'm delighted to introduce our guest speakers today. We have Stacie Smith and Raissa Amany for today's event. Stacie Smith is the Executive Director of the Young Canadians Roundtable on Health. She completed a certificate in Health, Wellness, and Recreation at Eastern College in 2014, graduated from Dalhousie Kinesiology in 2020, and from the University of New Brunswick in Fredericton in Education in 2022. She has begun working as a youth mental health project coordinator with Partners for Youth in Fredericton. I'd also like to mention that she's a founder of the Mental Health Student Support Network, Groundbreaker with Frayme, and as well as a co-lead of the Mental Health International Youth Advisory Committee. She's quite passionate about school food, food insecurity, youth mental health, as well as youth engagement. Our second speaker as well is Raissa Amany, who's the co-executive director of the Young Canadians Roundtable on Health. She's currently pursuing an undergraduate degree in health sciences at the University of Ontario. She's passionate about the intersectionality of public health, health equity, and youth engagement. Having personally seen how health inequity affects marginalized populations, Raissa continues to advocate for the improvement of accessibility and youth engagement within the health sector. Raissa is also a Youth Advisor Council member with the Knowledge Institute for Child and Youth Mental Health and Addictions and Kids Help Phone, as well as a research partner with CAMH and a groundbreaker with Frayme. I'd like to hand it over now to our two presenters for today's event.
Thanks, Priscilla. Excuse me. Hi, everyone. I can't see folks in my screen, so I'm just going to say hello. And thank you so much for being here. And Stacie and I will be sharing our insights as being youth partners and how, being engaged in research as a youth partner. So a little bit before we head on to our presentation, I always love to do a land acknowledgement. As always, I am committed to respectfully engaging and creating a relationship with individuals, families, and children within all pan-Canadian, with all Indigenous individuals and representatives. And I am from the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. I highly encourage for you to learn more from where you are. And I will head to this part. So we have a bit of ground rules, but they're not really rules. They're just more so of a participation and engagement guidelines. So again, we really hope to create a really safe space where everyone can ask questions and share their experiences. Again, for comfort, feel free to shut off your camera since this is a virtual event and move around as we chat about youth engagement and participation. Feel free to ask any questions throughout the period. Feel free to cut us off by unmuting or raising your hand. It's fine. And lastly, sharing and learning. So what is said here stays here and what is learned leaves here. So just keep that in mind as you go through kind of sharing your experiences. With that said, yeah. Okay, so I'll let Stacie to talk about this part.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Raissa. And hi, everybody. It's great to see you all today. I would like also to acknowledge that I am situated today on the unceded territory of the Mi'kma'ki in Halifax. Typically, I do live on the unceded territory of the Wolastoqey and Mi'kma'ki peoples in New Brunswick as well. And a little introduction about who we are. So the Young Canadians Roundtable on Health, YCRH. We're a national youth-led, youth-run advisory committee, roundtable board, lots of different ways to think about us, that participate in decision-making around children and youth health. So we provide that youth perspective and youth insights to these different challenges that are happening. Obviously, there's a lot of challenges happening in children and youth health care right now in pediatrics. So it's a really important time to have this conversation today. We work in partnership with a national charity called the Sandbox Project. They more focus on the research side of things, so knowledge mobilization, translation. We do have a great youth and adult allyship relationship with them. They let us make all our own decisions, but they're there for support, administrative and financial support as well. So really happy to have them have us as an organization. So we're made up of over 50 youth from across Canada, so coast to coast to coast. From Vancouver, BC to St. John's, Newfoundland, we have representation, also from different communities, Indigenous populations, other marginalized communities as well. We're between the ages of 15 and 32. We always are looking for other new members that are within that age range as well, so happy to talk about that later on as well. A little bit about kind of our focuses and our objectives. So kind of talked about this a little bit, but we're looking to be Canada's strong youth voice when it comes to these issues that relate to children and youth health, particularly with our decision makers, federally, provincially, and policymakers. Some of our specific initiatives that we like to focus on are in areas of injury prevention, mental health, growing healthy bodies, and the environment. And that's only just a few. We definitely are a bit broader than that. We also try to create opportunities to support and educate Canadian youth with the goal of improved quality of health in youth across the country. This can include advocacy campaigns. We use our social media a lot to educate young people, which I think's been a really great tool for us. We also always love to develop new relationships with people and organizations that are involved in child and youth health issues. So we always love to collaborate with other like-minded people. So always happy to have that conversation. And generating national awareness of youth health initiatives. There's so many different things that are going on out there, so kind of banding together is a really big goal of ours. And kind of goes off into this next point, collaborate with partners to advance equity and inclusion in children and youth related research and programs. So something that's really important to us as well. So we're gonna start off with a Mentimeter question. So if you haven't used Mentimeter before, at the top of the screen, you'll see the link to the Mentimeter website and that 8-digit code. That will be the code you'll input to participate in our session. So I'll give you a second to get that going. You could use it on your computer, your phone, if you'd rather, see what was going on the screen at the same time. So totally up to you. And if you have questions about how to access it, please don't hesitate. And for our first question, because obviously our main topic today is engaging the community, specifically youth, we'd love to know how you define community. And just confirming, Raissa, is the poll open as well? Just want to make sure.
Yes, it should be open. Yeah.
Perfect. I know I've had challenges with that in the past, so. All right, we have some answers coming in. Belonging, absolutely. You want to feel like you belong to a specific group of people. Equitable participation, absolutely. That's something really big that we strive for at the YCRH with any of our collaborations or partnerships. Connection, absolutely. You want to feel like you're connected with, like-minded individuals. Common goals and values, absolutely. When it comes to those collaborations, you want to make sure that you're all aligned with what you believe in. And we have group of people affected / potentially affected by that activity topic of interest. Goes back really well to common goals and values. Absolutely. Diversity of representation. Yeah, that's another great one too. Just give me another maybe 30 seconds and then we can move right along. So we have one more Mentimeter for this section to get some ideas of what kind of knowledge we're coming in with today. Amazing. So really great answers. I think everyone's on the same page with this. So now we'll kind of move into a little word cloud. So wondering what word comes to mind when you think of engaging the community for your own research. Obviously, we're all coming in here today with different research focuses and projects, so it might look a little different depending on what you're working on. Give you a chance to think about that. I'm really excited to learn more about what you folks are focusing on in your research too. Partnership. Yep. always the goal. Valued voices. Absolutely. Transparency. That's a really big one. Empowerment. Youth empowerment. Community empowerment. Collaboration. Necessary. That's an interesting one. I like that. I said partnership again. Okay. Challenging to do properly. Absolutely. And that's why you're here today. that works out. Oh, something else came in. Meaningful. Yeah. Importance and valuable. Valuable, I'm going to say. Absolutely. Maybe I'll give you another 30 seconds to input any last minute thoughts. All right. Really great to hear what kind of knowledge you're already coming in with today. So a little bit about what youth engagement actually is. And you could also put this with community engagement as well. So it's really about empowering all young people as valuable partners in addressing and making decisions about issues that affect them personally, or that could just be something that they believe to be important. We get this definition from the Knowledge Institute of Children and Youth Mental Health and Addictions in Ottawa. And really, empowerment is the big piece. You want to make sure that they feel like anything they're contributing is actually being used. Those decisions that are affecting them, they get a chance to be a part of that and get to sit at have a seat at the table, but in a meaningful way, which we're going to talk about in more detail. I always love talking about the Hearts Ladder of participation. You've probably heard of it as well. This is our own version that we had one of our members create, which is beautifully drawn. So there's different rungs on the ladder when it comes to ways that youth can be engaged with. So I think the 6, 7, 8 are the ones to strive for, depending on your project or your initiative. So youth adult equality, just making sure that you both have the same decision-making power. Again, it's very project specific. It may not be the specific way of engagement you want to use for that piece. Completely youth-driven, the example being the YCRH. So all the focusing, all of the decisions are in the youth hands. But then even equity, I think, is more important. So youth and adults have, whatever needs that they need to be met and whatever decisions that make sense for them to have, they have. And I think it's good to be on the same page with that with the adults. And that goes back to when I mentioned the youth-adult allyship relationship. It's just really important to have that because, adults can learn just as much from us as we can from them. That's something I always like to make sure people know. Obviously, we don't want tokenism, checking that box. That's something that we try to bring up lots in conversations and presentations and conversations with elected officials. Saying decoration, manipulation, you don't want to be down far there. So really those top 3 are the most important rungs that you can do to ensure that your youth engagement is meaningful. So we have another Mentimeter. We have lots of these today. So thinking about some of your engagement values for yourself, what do you think are the most important values? And how would you make sure that these values are reflected throughout your engagement process? So think about how you plan to engage people before coming here today. inclusivity, absolutely. Diversity, transparency, yep. Respect. Respect is a really big piece. Transparency as well, because, you know, if not all the information is laid out there for you and you don't realize it, you're going to have some miscommunication, which isn't always the best. Trust, absolutely. Trusting that what you're going to be using is what you're going to be sharing with them is going to be used and used appropriately too, you know, making sure that things are confidential and only used the way that you say they're going to be used. Lots of intersectionalities with a lot of these answers too. Transparency and trust go hand in hand. Creating an engagement strategy that outlines these values and how we will uphold them together is a way that I ensure they are reflected in the process. Absolutely. A strategy that, you know, that works for everybody with the values that they have and the goals that they want to get out of engaging in this research. That's great. All right, maybe we'll move on to the next slide. Some really great ideas. Remember if this is another Mentimeter or slide. Oh, we have a couple more questions or answers that came in first. Checking with members frequently is also a technique I use to ensure these values are reflected. Absolutely, that's something we do at the YCRH. We want to make sure that they're having a good experience. You know, we do a midway point survey. Actually, coming up in June, we'll be doing that to see what things we can do to improve. Continual reflexivity, absolutely. Always making sure that you're doing things based on some of the feedback you're getting right away. Really great responses, folks. All right, and I think this question almost kind of bounces out the last one. What things should you consider when engaging the community? So what are those things you need to think about? Capacity, that's a really big one. Some young people want to be involved with everything. I feel like Raissa and I can attest to that. We always feel like we like doing a lot more than we can actually have the capacity for because we want to do it all. What methods, platforms do they prefer? Yes, that's something we do. We always try to have, you know, we have Slack available, we email people, we do newsletters. Having those different types of formats is great. Accessibility is really big. Yeah, we record meetings for folks, meeting minutes. We have closed captioning. Compensation, absolutely. Raissa is going to touch up more on that later on, but we've been able to have a great partnership with Sandbox to be able to provide honorariums to our youth. But it's not even just about monetary compensation. You know, there's lots of other ways to do that, again, which Raissa will talk about. Who to engage? Who do we need to bring to the table? Absolutely. Diversity as well. We talked about that lots. And mutual benefit, absolutely. You know, what are we both going to get out of this relationship? Support the team can provide members and how. Always, always super important. Harms to participants, yes, that goes really to the ethical considerations. Another topic Raissa is going to talk about. People are gearing up for your talk. I love it. This was a really good question to ask. A lot of people had some good ideas already. I'll give you another 30 seconds or so if you have any last minute things you'd like to add. Where engagement will take place. Location is key, absolutely. If you're working with rural communities, is it maybe more beneficial to have a virtual option? Hybrid's becoming more and more common since lockdowns have ended. In person can always be a challenge for folks to get there. The big one. Fantastic. So here's a few key things that we always think about and try to incorporate into our work when it comes to how to be real with meaningful youth engagement. I didn't make that title, I'll say that right now. So ensuring that partnership is active and intentional and that youth are involved in all parts. Something that is starting to be less common, but was common, was the end of grant KT is just including them at the end, just ensuring they're there from the very beginning. You want to make sure they're embedded in all parts and get all the experiences that they want to get. Youth can voice their perspectives and ideas without judgments, and that they're experts at the table. So making sure that it's a safe space, which Raissa talked about off the top, making sure that they'll feel like they can actually contribute. Initiatives and programs incorporate the ideas and experiences of youth. So again, they're going to have different experiences than adults do. So ensuring those ideas are incorporated. They're not going to want to do something that they don't want to be involved with, that the adults created based on what they think they want. So that's something to think about. Youth get to build on their knowledge and skills through engagement. So they'll be able to use some of what they've learned in future careers, even in post-secondary studies if they're in high school. It's long-term and resource intensive. So you have to have the resources involved in it. So, funding, connections, there's so many things to think about. And then finally, it's beneficial to youth organizations, community, and the broader public. Any of these initiatives that involve young people will go back to the community and involve even more young people that may not have been involved in the process and really help everybody out. So another Mentimeter, what are some challenges you faced when you've been trying to engage community, if you have already with some of the research you've been doing? I feel like we've touched on a few of those when we were doing our last question. Language barriers, yes, that's a big one. Yes. Knowing where to start. Absolutely. And that's why we're here today. Distance, rural versus urban, definitely talked about that. Trying to figure out where they are. People willing to participate. That's a big one. Some people just can't be bothered, unfortunately. So incentivizing is something that you can think about a little bit. Funding. That's all what we all talk about everywhere. Everyone's competing for the same grants and all of that sort of thing. So I think Raissa is going to take over for me for a moment here.
Yeah, no worries. We'll give another 30 seconds. Just so if anyone else have any other challenges that they would like to share. Okay. Oh, last one. Training or lack of experience with this, absolutely. That can be definitely a barrier, especially when you're trying to engage partners in research, for sure. Okay. Oh, lastly, engaging harder to reach groups. Yes. It's really, really hard sometimes to create and cultivate the relationships when you're trying to engage hard to reach groups. I honestly hate that term just because of they are actually reachable if you meet where they are. So I'll chat more about that in a minute. So okay. So There are. I'm going to start telling more about the challenges because you've already mentioned the challenges, but I'm going to be chatting more about kind of the different common challenges that you've talked about, and also what I found throughout my my experience as a partner, like on the other side. But I'll chat more also on kind of the other side of it too, because I've been on the other side with the YCRH trying to engage the community on our different projects and etc. I found that there's 3 big categories of challenges, and the big 3 is relational, scientific, and ethical. And with relational, we start chatting more about power dynamics, the lack of trust, and power inequalities. Those are the kind of the relational issues that I come up with. But it's not obsolete. I mean, it's not the only ones. There's more, but that's like kind of the big 3 that I always think about whenever I try to engage folks in research, for example. With scientific, there's always talk about kind of time deliverables and constraints with engaging partners, community partners especially, just because of I'm aware, like if we get grants from CAMH or SSHRC, for example, the time crunch is so real, and you probably have experienced it too, of trying to recruit partners, like community members in, applying for grants, but it's really short deadline. So I can chat more about that in a minute. And then in terms of methodological issues, you mentioned about how they sometimes have a lack of training, not necessarily a lack of training, but they've never been trained in research before. And then lastly, with acknowledgements, right, with compensations, how do we do that? And lastly, with ethical, this come up more often whenever you work with folks who are considered marginalized community, like hard to reach, members, and folks who are a minor. That's definitely when we start talking about that. We talk about the harms and benefits. I know someone mentioned about that. We also chat more about confidentiality and whether it impacts kind of the confidential aspects of research. And lastly, about informed consent. So kind of chatting more about the minor side and how do we determine, consent and the capacity to consent when they are partners in research. So I guess this first question comes up for kind of the relational, and like, what do you think is an essential component to relationship building? When it comes to creating relationships, especially with your partners, what are some things that you should think about with that? Respect, absolutely. The respect goes both ways, absolutely. Value, absolutely. Having common values and also valuing in your community members is important as well. Communication, absolutely. Communication is I wouldn't say kind of, it's very important. Whenever we are, doing research in general, but more so, especially if we're engaging youth and community members. Trust, yes, absolutely. Trust is imperative to the relationship. Vulnerability with one another. Yes, researcher being open when they are unsure about something, absolutely. And I think that goes hand in hand with humility as well, right? And the humility of like the research members may hold knowledge that, is relevant to that specific identity that they carry and may be of value to the research. Meeting people where they are at, absolutely. My favorite 5 words, meeting people where they are at. I preached that too many times. Stacie knows.
It's a big one.
Yeah. I'll give another 45 seconds. I'm very exact, but no. Okay, wonderful. Oh, lastly, okay. Support to being part of research. Yeah, absolutely. Having support is important for the partners just because of sometimes the emotional labor that comes with it. And also the time that they're spending to help out with your projects is really important. And lastly, time. Oh my God. Wonder is there enough time to do things? But yeah, absolutely. Having actually allotting more time is important rather than, because like sometimes you budget time and you think it's important. I would add like 0.5 more to that time if you can, especially when you're working with community members, just because their role as partners in your research is not their only role in their life, right? Because if we think about our own seat, like we are doing this research full time and it's our role, but community members, they're doing this out of their working hours, and you know, it's basically volunteer time. So just keeping that in mind. And lastly, communicating how communicating how the relationship is mutual beneficial. Absolutely. It goes both ways, and how the benefits actually is more so again both ways, but I think there's been kind of a talk of how a lot of people think that, you know, researchers are just trying to get into community members and just for their knowledge, but I think we really underpin of how much value they can get out of it. So that's really important as well. Okay, I can move on to the next slide. So there's a few solutions that I've thought of. Like, I was really reflecting as an individual who, you know, have done being a partner and also been as a researcher on the other hand. And I think these 4 things are kind of my go-to solutions when things come up, kind of my central dogma, I guess, per se. So I guess the first one is really challenging the ageist bias on ability and skills. This came up from my own experiences as a partner, and this is actually one of my earliest experiences as a partner, was that I had a PI who really valued youth voices and really value the fact that like I carry a different knowledge but also still beneficial to the research, and she really challenged some of the ageist bias, and she said that openly, that like, oh, I'm currently holding a negative view about what you just said, but at the same time, I realize where you're coming from, but it's still beneficial. So having that humility as well, especially when you're having like an ageist bias, is really important. Second is acknowledging like the preconceived biases and the power you hold. So Stacie will go later after my whole spiel about the different challenges, and it's an exercise called the flower power, and it's a really useful exercise when you're talking about what are the different power, like you know, the different power that you hold with the different identities that you have, right? For example, in this country, being white male, you know, cis male, holds more power than someone who is you know, identifies as gay and you know, South Asian, for example. So it again, like, that's really important, like reflecting on the different biases that you have, because it can really affect the way that you relate to each other, especially to someone minor who have different identities than you do. Number 3 is really deliberating about the nurturing the relationship. So really spending time and adding more time than you think you may need to connect with the partners that you are partnering with. Like getting really curious about your partner, just beyond the superficial. Because what I did recognize as well with my PI, who, you know, who I was really comfortable with, she took more time, and she was actually genuinely invested in the things I do outside of the research and the time I spent with her. So again, it goes it goes more than you think of actually being genuinely interested in their lives. Lastly, this is more so about the power dynamic, and chatting more about kind of power inequalities. Co-creating a terms of reference together has been really helpful with that, because when you co-create something, you do it together, and you negotiate, you discuss about it together, and it actually kind of prevents kind of conflict afterwards, because you've kind of decided a terms of reference together. And when you created that terms of reference, you said your piece. So it should not create conflict after kind of the power inequality. But again, you will still have that power inequality just because you're, on one hand, you're a PI, or like, you're a master's student doing the research, but you have a participants or partners with you. You still have that power imbalances a little bit, but this kind of mitigates some of it. But that dynamic, again, can be mitigated as long as you, the equity piece, like when we talk about the Hart's ladder, like that youth adult equity piece is like the way to go. Okay. So in terms of the scientific challenges, like when we chat more about the methodology issues, and we chat more about the time constraints with grants and whatnot, and also more about the partners' capacity and experience with research, I think the first thing that we should think about is kind of getting to know your partner's comfortability with research, with methodologies and procedures. And I would say 85% of the time, partners may have some idea in terms of like what kind of like research you do on a very superficial level. Like we chat more about kind of like, oh, like you're doing research on mental health, that's so cool. Like, is it interview based or surveys? Like they may have a really superficial idea, but they wouldn't know the nitty gritty of, for example, you would use a reflexive thematic analysis. Like they wouldn't know that. But I think it's really important, especially as partners, for them to understand, I would say, to a level that they would feel comfortable at in being able to help with your project, in a comfortable level. So I would say take the time to kind of teach them about the qualitative process, right? Like teach them about the qualitative as like, more about less numbers, but more words, and, telling them that like we usually do it through surveys or ethnographies or whatever it is. And then we would do a thematic analysis and kind of explain more, because when I was a partner, I really appreciated getting to know more about the qualitative process and learning more about how actually it really works, right? And with quantitative as well, kind of do like just a basic overview of like the way that you're going to do quantitative research in your project. Like, for example, if you're going to use surveys, or you're going to grab data, for example, from, I don't know, the health informatics, like Canadian Institute for Health Informatics, I don't know, right? And kind of say that like, oh, I'm going to do like an analysis using SPSS or whatever it is. Just take the time to explain. I think second, also the second part to this is it ties back to the first one, providing kind of like research training needed. So one thing that that comes up is kind of like ethics training, EDIA, some even like qualitative research training would be kind of important as well, especially if you're only doing qualitative research. For quantitative, I'm not quite sure, but again, I think like even having some quantitative training would be kind of interesting as well, for them to be able to contribute meaningfully, especially at the data collection and data analysis, or even in the beginning when you're doing like some study design. Lastly, we're going to talk more about compensation and acknowledgement. So I think this is the part where a lot of people have questions about, because again, money is important, just because again, they are providing their time and expertise beyond the standard 9 to 5, right? It's their volunteer role. I think like a good, again, a good thing, a good, I guess not necessarily a standard, but like a good way to think about compensation is kind of going by the living wage for your city. So again, it differs for every city, and it also differs with every project, because you would have to consider your budget and also the amount of time they spend, and also the amount of, I guess, work that they would need to put into. There's also beyond the means of compensation, right? There's other ways that I can chat more about just in the next slide, because like acknowledgement is not all about money, and Stacie and I have accepted other ways of acknowledgement, and because like again, like they would have limited budget, but like here's other ways that we would be compensated, and we would be more than happy to accept in most times. So I guess the first one is co-authorship, and co-authorship on research, you know, on your publications and for presentations. But it would be appropriate and proportional to the level of involvement that they would do. So again, myself and Stacie have been on publications, many of them, because like that's what they do when they have limited money usually. Second question, the second part is having verbal recognition. So what I really appreciated when some of the projects that I've been is getting verbal recognition during meetings, just being like, oh, thanks to Raissa who have done this part. Like, I mean, this is a really small gesture, and it's kind of like overlooked sometimes. So it's really nice to hear that. And lastly is having written recognition on reports and publications. So, you know, if we, you know, if you think about kind of written acknowledgement is different than co-authorship, of course. It's a little less preferred for myself, because I do prefer co-authorship just because it holds a greater meaning for folks who have like like an academic background or kind of striving to get into academia. But it's still good to have that as well. Okay. And then lastly, with the ethical challenges, I would say really reflect on whether the participation will conclude in social exclusion or harm. So if we start thinking about, you know, how do we reach hard to reach communities, like I hate that, but like thinking about, you know, whether their participation will lead to social exclusion and harm, and like how do we actually mitigate that? Like what safeguards do we put in place in order for them to feel safe and will be safe in participating as a partner. I mean, it's not going to be 100%, but like, how do we get to 99.9%? We also have to keep in mind with minors is that a lot of times parents will have to be involved, because, you know, with REB, they need someone who is 18 to sign the papers. So just have the parents be involved during the consent process, but have the youth and parent create the decision together. That's really important, and was modeled when I was a minor, when I was a minor and became a partner in research. Lastly, co-designing the research project with youth partners. This will mitigate some of the worries, especially if you're working with minors and their parents, with around kind of how sometimes, you know, they're afraid that they will be taken advantage of with their knowledge. So having that co-design process kind of helps have both parties have the same expectations together. Like, you know, it's written in a document, it's written together. And really providing meaningful roles and responsibilities will also help me to mitigate that feeling of being taken advantage of. So yeah, let's see. Okay, and I guess, excuse me, the next question, mentee question we have for you is, what do you think a successful community engagement would look like? Yeah, absolutely. Empowering members to lead aspects of the research process. Absolutely. Everyone's credited. Yeah, absolutely. For sure. What was I going to say? No, but yeah, no, absolutely. Having it credited and it's written in like paper or stone. Impact at the community level, absolutely. I think it's really important that it created some change, and it created a positive change for sure. Including diverse perspectives, yeah, absolutely. It's really important with, especially with everything now. Diversity is really important. Okay. Community wanting to lead other initiatives, for sure. A lot of the projects that I've been on as a partner, it kind of just splitted, right? Like we have like our initial project, it just kind of split, and it's really cool when you see that. Okay. All right. We can go to this activity quickly if you want, Stace, or.
Trying to mute. Yeah, we can. Absolutely. I know we're kind of a little bit behind on time. So this is the Power Flower activity. I'm not sure how aware folks are it. So usually we'd have pre-drawn flowers, but if everyone has a piece of paper for this, and if you don't, that's okay. We can also do it out loud too. That's probably going to be the easier way to do it. We kind of want to get an idea of what kind of relationship people have with power and what characteristics that we draw on when it comes to leadership and movement building, really. So each petal is going to represent one category of our identity. So there's going to be some different categories. So our sex, our religion, as a couple examples. So everyone's going to write on their petals of their flowers dominant characteristics that you think you use when it comes to each category. So, Raissa, maybe if you can somehow write on the I think the next slide you have the categories, if I'm correct. I thought I saw it. Maybe.
I don't think I can draw because it's not.
I thought the next. I thought one of the slides may have had. Oh yes, there is one slide that has some of them. If you're able to zoom in, the other one you have there.
Oh, I can't.
That one has. Oh, you can't. Okay, I can also read them out. I have it in front of me too. So just one sec here. I can zoom in a little bit. So we have ethnic group, language, religion, education, family, social class, age group, sex, geographic regions. Obviously, for you folks, that won't be any much different. Just a few examples. So just mainly the ones that you would think about when you're thinking about leadership, and those are the things that you kind of draw off of. Maybe I'll give you, what, 5 minutes for that? Perfect. And again, if you'd rather not draw a flower, you can just write them out. All right, it's been about 5 minutes, so would love to hear what folks came up with for some of the different attributes that they use when it comes to leadership. Anyone just wants to write in the chat or raise their hand, whichever you're comfortable with. Or Raissa, do you have any that you'd like to share that you could think of?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, what are my different powers? Sorry, I'm just trying to think clearly. For me personally, I think the geographic region current is a power that I would have for sure. The country we're living in, Canada, is a first world country. That would be for sure a power. What else would be a power? My gender and identity would also be a power. Being cisgendered, Indigenous slash settler, a settler, I as well would be a power in this current political climate. Another thing too with sexual orientation, being straight. I think with education as well is also a power since I am currently pursuing my undergraduate degree. And yeah, I think that's my current powers. I don't know, Stacie, if you want to share yours.
Yeah, I mean, definitely not geographical where I'm at, so that's for sure. I say for me, the biggest piece would be race, being white. I think that's really a big power one. Education as well, what Priscilla just mentioned, where I have several degrees. I think that's a big one too. And even age group. I'm a late millennial, and a lot of the opportunities seem to be going to late millennials. So those are some big ones for me. And Priscilla had mentioned geographic region current, absolutely. Education, gender identity, and age group. Yeah, they're big ones. It is a tough exercise. It's a lot to think about, really. We don't think about these things. They kind of are one of those like not intuitive, but automatic things that just are there. So a chat. I'm proficient in 4 languages, including English. It's a big power. I wish I knew more than just English. The cusp of a millennial Gen Z, yes. That point where like tech was there, or sorry, tech wasn't there, and then it was all of a sudden there. That's a big one. We know what VCRs are and cassette tapes. Anyone else have anything to share? No. Again, it is tough to think about, especially in that that really quick time frame too. So.
Sure.
Okay. Great, thanks folks for participating. Yes, education is big, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of folks having a bachelor's is a big deal, especially people who aren't in Canada. So, and that wraps up, I guess that wraps up the first portion of our presentation.
And I hope you were all able to grab yourselves a snack, something to drink. We're just about to restart the event. I'll pass it back to Stacie and Raissa to reshare their slide deck and continue today's webinar.
Perfect, thanks Priscilla. Okay, so this is the fun part of our presentation. We'll do a case study together. I know there's 4 of you right now, and We are going to do a collaborative work on it just because, again, I think it's better if we do collaborative rather than individual and like having everyone to present. And I think it's easy. I think it's easier if we do as a team. So meet Quinn. Quinn is a 17-year-old high school student living in rural Manitoba. They are a newcomer to Canada from Albania and does not speak fluent English. They're currently interested in being a partner in your mixed research study on the relationship between mental health of newcomers and food security. They've never been involved in research, either as a participant or as a partner. They were originally interested in being part of your study due to the compensation that was outlined from your research poster. However, the parents did not allow them to participate since their parents thought they would be taken advantage of. However, they are really interested and are asking you whether they would be able to sign the consent form without their parents. So here are the questions that I've outlined. So the first question is, what would you do in regard to the parents' concern? 2 is, how do you get Quinn engaged beyond the compensation outline since they've said that they've only been interested in the compensation piece? 3 is, how would you prep Quinn if they were to become a partner? And lastly, what ethical, relationship, and scientific considerations would you need to consider? I can type these in the chat. Just give me a second to find the original. Just give me a second. I just have to unshare for a minute. But feel free to discuss in this space with each other. So I'm just gonna find it. Give me 2 seconds. Okay. Does anyone want to start off the conversation? Priscilla, go ahead.
Thanks for typing those questions in the chat first and foremost, just so we have a chance to see them. I love this case study. I think something I would, really want to do is probably understand from the youth's perspective, what about the compensation was alluring, and did they really have a good understanding of what the ask was that aligns with the compensation? Is there capacity there for what the ask may be? And from the parent's perspective, you want to ensure that they're not feeling as though this is coercive or an ask that's going to assume all aspects of their life and perhaps get in the way of sports or education, but really drive home that mutual beneficiality piece. Again, just more of an understanding from their lens as to why they're feeling the way they're feeling, if they're open to that conversation before making any type of decisions and ways in which to move forward with this. But I wouldn't be encouraging the youth to sign on their own behalf without having their parent on board with this level of participation.
Absolutely. No, for sure. And I think that's kind of like my thinking as well, is like, because like I've actually experienced this with my parents when I was a minor and being a partner, and they were like, you sure you're not going to get taken advantage of? So I really love what you said, Priscilla. Who was Emily? Go ahead.
Yes, I wonder, in order to promote buy-in from the parents, or at least to seek clarity, if it would be appropriate to hold some form of like information night, or at the very least send out an email kind of outlining the project in more detail and offering like a drop-in session to answer any questions that they might have.
For sure. And I think that's one way that you can address the parents, their concerns, and what the research project is really about. So that's for sure. Thanks for sharing. Aksha said, agreed, great case study, a lot of moving parts. I would start with addressing the language barrier and find out what motivated the student to participate in the study along with the financial point of view. Absolutely. Sure. I think the first 2 questions were answered, sort of. the first question for sure have been answered. I am kind of curious about your thoughts about how do you get Quinn engaged beyond the compensation outlined. Anyone want to start with that, or? How would you ask Quinn in terms of that, and how do you kind of like prompt it out of him? Because again, like there's a lot of moving parts with the language barrier and also the fact that they just want the money because there could be XYZ reasons. Like how would you coax that out of him and just to learn more and maybe try to influence? I don't know if it's influence the right word, but more so like, you know, ask him like, or tell him kind of like the reasons, but that would align with his, you know, motivation. Go ahead, Priscilla.
I was going to say, you know, potentially explaining to Quinn other opportunities beyond the financial piece that can arise from this. It may be taking more of a peer leadership role within the community and mobilizing youths to be involved in the project, driving more impact in the community in that sense. Co-authorship or authorship in conference presentations, perhaps presenting on behalf of the research team as well in a public setting might be of interest to Quinn. So kind of presenting more than just the compensation and what potentially could be out there as options to see where Quinn is most interested in and earmarking that as the researcher to help empower Quinn on taking on those roles.
For sure, absolutely. And I think it's we all have limitations in terms of what we can put on a poster. So that's for sure one way to do it. Yeah, have a conversation, getting to know them, understanding their motivation for sure. Oh, in terms of the research topic, being mental health and food security, I would prioritize them, helping them and their family find resources in their community, regardless of them participating in the study, for sure. And I think that could be a motivation for someone to join a study, right? If it really aligns with their experiences of, because again, like the criteria would be like, you know, have you experienced food insecurity, and that could be one, right? So that's for sure one thing to consider. I think another question that we haven't answered is like, how would you prep Quinn if they were to decide to become a partner, and especially if this is a mixed study, right? Mixed like method study. How would that work? Because there's a lot of moving parts in terms of, you know, I think it's easier if a study is purely quantitative or purely qualitative. But how would you prep someone if it's a mixed study? Emily, is that a legacy hand or a new hand?
Sorry, that's a legacy hand. Love that
No,
term.
no worries. No, it's all good. I'll give folks a minute to check in the chat. Sorry. Okay, what was in the chat? Having frequent touch points with the research coordinator or PI to discuss mixed method approach, providing learning opportunities and professional development, absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely getting them familiar with the process of being a mixed method would be important. because again, like they've never participated as a participant or as even as a partner, so it would be completely brand new to them in terms of how the heck does research actually work. Yeah. Anything else, anyone? Finding documents in accessible languages as well, for sure. And I think one thing to go further with that is having an ally, not necessarily a research staff, but more so an ally who would who speak their language or even from their background would be good as well to have. They said Akshat said, I would try to ensure that they would feel safe expressing themselves as a participant in the study and let them know that they have support from multiple avenues, such as research team members and other participants who come from similar backgrounds and can relate to their lived experience. Yeah, absolutely. I think it like having an ally would will make them feel more comfortable, and having someone to kind of lean on in the event that they wouldn't feel comfortable reaching to a PI, for example, because it could be intimidating. I think we can move on to the last question that I had for you all is like, what ethical, I guess, relationship and also scientific considerations would you need to consider with this case study? I'll give you guys a minute. Honestly, feel free to open the mic. Yeah. Risk exposure to the youth versus its benefits and how to mitigate it, ensuring that conversation is not coercive but reflective of the ask, for sure. And I think like the risk here is that consent, right? The consent piece, especially around languages and the consent as well with their parents, with navigating the perspective that the parents have is for sure important to keep in mind. Anyone else have any other thoughts, especially around the difference? Ethical considerations. I would also make it clear that they can leave the study at any point. Absolutely. Especially if they haven't done research or been a research participant. That's something that they would not know. And then how to manage and grow the relationship beyond research. That's really important as projects end, but usually relationships don't. So having kind of a plan in terms of like what comes next, right? After the research is done. Do you guys stay connected as professional colleagues, or right? How would that work? Or would another project start? It could also be that. Any other considerations that would we need to chat about or think about? I'll give another minute for folks to drop in the chat if they have anything else. There's no relevant projections, and given the qualitative nature of the study, I would prioritize quality of responses over quantity, for sure. Absolutely. I didn't list this as a question, but I am wondering, in the event that the parent says no, what would you do? I mean, we know from an RB standpoint, they need to be 18. But there's also been events where RB approved, I think, not having parents for older adolescents, but I could be wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Stacie, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Any thoughts? To fill the crickets.
So the crickets, yeah. Could you repeat the question for me so I don't repeat
No, the
myself?
question is, what would you do if the parent says no, but they're still really interested to be in? But like my thoughts came to, usually REB wants someone 18 to sign the form, but there also been cases where REB approved like for older adolescents, like the older ages, like our age range, like 16, 17 to sign. I don't know. So
Yeah, I mean, because 16 is the legal age in some jurisdictions, you have to think about that.
yeah.
When I say legal age, obviously not very much of driving, and I think maybe a couple other things, but it's almost being an adult then. So I think that's something to think about, whether jurisdictions, whether it might be able to be bypassed. But if there's a way to involve them without the need for REB in some different way, there could be some brainstorming done to do that.
Yeah, Priscilla, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a little bit. So I opened up the TCPS2 document to see what they had to say on this topic, and it deep dives into what we're discussing around. There isn't a specific age of consent for children, so you could revise your REB if you wanted to. It's not necessarily the age, but whether they have the capacity to understand the significance of the research and the implications of the risk and benefits to themselves, the way in which it's outlined in the document. I am noticing as well that REB is increasingly becoming open to allowing children between the ages of 12 to 17 to consent on their own behalf, but I don't know if that's across the board for all REBs in terms of their stance. So I tend to follow the guidelines of the individual REB approval process.
Yeah, no, then that's what I was, what I had a feeling of in the TCPS. Kate, go ahead.
Yeah, this is a really challenging question. Thanks for asking it. I think it might also really depend on, especially with kind of working with REB on something like this, the nature of the research and the kind of burden that might be placed on the participant, or the kind of sensitivity of the information and if there's any risk involved. So I think if it's a low risk project, it might be easier, but it could be dependent on that.
For sure. And yeah, and I think that's also something with REBs, right? Like they always judge risk. And I mean, mental health, like mental health can be low risk, but it also can be high risk. So again, it's really difficult. Like I know, like, cause like the case study, like the case vignette is not necessarily deep into like what the project is about, but like generally it's about mental health and food insecurity. So, it's really difficult. But Stacie, you were gonna mention about kind of like engaging outside of the REB. What were you gonna say?
Yeah, I mean, if there's a way that we can involve the youth without having something that's under the REB, whether it's just dependent on what kind of activities they want to do, I think just finding something that's not under that REB. I wouldn't have to be able to think of any examples off the top of my head, but yeah.
For sure. Okay. And anyone else want to bring up kind of their thoughts around the different 4 questions that we kind of haven't discussed or touched about? I think, let's see, is there anything else that we missed? Okay, I don't think there's anything else. So I'm gonna hand it back to Priscilla because here we'll just present our contact page. But really, thank you so much for being engaged in our presentation, and it's been really an honor for us to kind of share our experiences and our thoughts as youth partners who've been in multiple different research studies being as partners. It's been an interesting ride for both of us. Like, I can't say, like, I won't speak for Stacie, but for me personally, it's been an interesting, tumultuous ride filled with excitement and also some disappointments along the way. Of course, everything's a learning process, but yeah, I'll pass it to Stacie if you have any last words for our part of the presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for having us again. It's always a great pleasure to present to the trainees and the folks with Leon Center. And yeah, definitely we've all had our own different experiences, highs and lows with engaging with research. Some people are better at it than others. So yeah, looking forward to having further conversations. Feel free to email us. Always happy to chat.
Yeah,
perfect. Well, I want to thank both of you on behalf of the Leon Center as well for joining us today and deep diving into this conversation around strategies for engaging youth partners in research. Both of you are a